Though our tanks and artillery are mighty, it is the vast ranks of Imperial Guardsmen that shall trample the enemy to dust. Let them come.
Of the countless armies raised from the Imperium's worlds, few can claim to rival the rigorous standards and unflappable devotion to duty which the Cadian Shock Troops possess. Their resilience and efficiency is what makes the Cadians my favorites among the ranks of the Imperial Guard, and today I'm gonna tell you about them and try to paint a few models while I do it. Emphasis on try. Oh, right, I'm Mickey, by the way. Let's get started. The fortress world of Cadia stood unyielding for 10 millennia, a bulwark against the forces of chaos and a thumb in the warp storm known as the Eye of Terror. Its only inhabitants, battle-ready soldiers who had known nothing but the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, from cradle to grave. That is, until Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos and absolutely insane sore loser, picked a fight he couldn't win and pitched the galaxy's worst bitch fit by hurling a moon-sized space station at the planet. Cadia was obviously destroyed by this, utterly torn apart by the collision of the Blackstone Fortress and assaulted by the demons of the Warp, now empowered and able to manifest on planet without the protection of the ancient pylon system which kept them at bay. Even then though, as the carnage devastated Cadia's surface and transformed it into a roiling nightmarescape, the Guard fought a delaying rearguard action long enough to stage an orderly evacuation. Unfortunately, the evacuation itself got very few people off planet in time, owing mostly to the confusion of the planet being hit with the celestial equivalent of a shuriken to the chest and the hordes of demons ganking scattered survivors, plus a considerable amount of bureaucratic incompetence and hand-wringing on the part of the Imperial Navy. By all accounts, millions of shock troopers survived a month-long planetary assault and the ground beneath them cracking apart just to reach an evac point and wait for a rescue that would, in many cases, never come or only take a tiny fraction of them off-world. Despite this, in the face of certain death, many of them severely wounded and out of supplies, these Cadians fortified their positions and held to the last against the ever-rising tide of demons and heretics flooding the shattered continents. This is where the well-known, well-deserved motto, "The planet broke before the Guard did," comes from. And yeah, I don't care if it's an outplayed meme at this point. If you read or watch something featuring Cadians and don't feel the teeniest bit swept up in patriotic fervor when someone yells either that phrase or "Cadia stands" before an assault, I think you're joyless and probably dead inside, because these people are genuinely awesome. They pack standard military gear that wouldn't look out of place in a mid-20th century army. I mean, I guess aside from the laser guns, and still manage to hold ground with the best of them. The standard Cadian Shock Trooper receives the same basic loadout as any other guardsman. Pre-fall, much of their gear, from the armor to their low-stick lighters, was of a pattern made for them and actually produced on their home planet or on the nearby Forge world of Agrippina. But the kit is pretty much the same as any other regiment. Lasgun, flak armor, carbon slab rations, a uniform and pack, some grenades and ammo, among other miscellaneous survival gear like a mini toolkit and shovel. The green armor of the shock troops is so widely recognized in the hobby that it's basically synonymous with box art generic guard. Generic doesn't have to mean bad or boring though. Painting these kits is fairly easy unless you're anything like me and can't paint a face if your life depended on it. And the blank plating leaves plenty of room for customization in case you don't want to go with the standard green. I've seen blue, black, and even once like a bright pink army that looked honestly pretty damn good. In lore though, flak armor is, well, it's not good, at least by 40k standards. From what I've seen online, some people think it would be essentially like a Kevlar vest, while others think it would be far superior. For my part, I tend to think it's closer to the former. The armor uses alternating layers of cloth, a plastic analog, and a heat-dispersing material, which is basically what a modern military standard tactical vest is. It would be capable of taking a glancing lasgun shot or a ricocheting autogun round and still saving the wearer, and while a lasgun shot, even one that wasn't a direct hit, would put anything we currently have in small modern arms to shame with force, heat, and accuracy, flak armor can't take a direct hit from it. Even if your flak armor did manage to protect you, that shot might still hurt. If it's from an autogun, you're getting knocked on your ass. You just won't die, and with the adrenaline of combat, I'd guess the average guardsman would pop back up and then feel the brunt of it after the fact. Anything heavier than a lasgun is probably punching straight through, though. Speaking of which, the lasgun, despite being a terrifying weapon by modern standards, isn't called a flashlight for no reason. It's the weakest standard weapon fielded by the armies of the 41st or 42nd or whatever millennium we're currently in. The principle behind the weapon is simple. Pump as many shots as you can into the enemy and just hope one of them does damage to something vital. In that, the guard's strength and numbers approach really is a strength. The Ceramite of Space Marine armor might stop a few lasgun shots, but it isn't stopping 100 of them all at once. Of course, if you don't have 100 guardsmen firing at the same target, you're probably screwed. In the early chapters of Shadow of the 8th, this gets shown off in a pretty unfortunate way. Minka and her squad run into a Chaos Terminator and pump as many shots into it as they can, but they're only a few guardsmen and the shots just glance off the armor. They're only saved by the intervention of a Space Marine from the Black Templars, which is just... man, of all the transhuman super angry boys coming to save you, that is one hell of a dice roll. That being said, the most common deployment for a guard regiment is to deal with rebellious planetary defense forces or Chaos Traitor guard armies, so the lasgun more than justifies its existence by virtue of cost efficacy and ease of production and maintenance. So, with the lore groundwork laid, let's get to painting. Full disclosure, I like to kit bash from spare parts or 3D print small bits, things like weapons, arms, heads, to give my units a little personality. I've also been known to print proxies that I think look a little more detailed or interesting than the originals, so what you'll see for some of the units I'll leave going in the B-roll are not standard out of the kit. I'm very much not a WYSIWYG sort of person, so you'll see 2 auto guns in a unit here, or a couple of gunners there, whatever I think just looks really cool. That being said, I'm pretty sure most of my kindergarten level painting skills could be replicated on pretty much any units from an army that I cover. So, take the loadouts with a grain of salt. Usually I just resolve this in a game. When I start, I'll tell my opponents, oh, here's what they've got. It's not usually an issue, but I know some people have preferences for what you see is what you get, and that's okay, perfectly valid. I just prefer to go with rule of cool. Same sort of way I handle things as like a DM for Star Wars RPG or D&D. It's just, hey, that seems pretty neat. Let's go with that. Anyway, I'm sure you're probably aching for me to actually get to the point, so here I'm laying down a thinned base coat of Xandri dust mixed with Morghast bone, around a 2-to-1 ratio. I'll just get the entire model coated with this. I do a lot of my base coating with an airbrush for consistency. Contrary to what you might think, it's really not all that expensive to pick up a rinky-dink one. I spent about $80 USD on this one. It works fine for my purposes. But if you really are opposed to the idea, 2 or 3 thin coats with your brush will set this guy up right. You could probably just do thinned Xandri dust, but I like the fatigues to start a little lighter. I'll just take this Castellan green base paint and get the flak colored in. A little Army Painter bootstrap brown for the straps and boots. Then finally some lead belcher for any metal bits. I'm only going to do a thin light layer of the green and brown for now because I'm going to come back and darken both with a little contrast paint, but if you want to stick with the Citadel method, just give the model 2 thin coats of each, just like all the painting videos say. Skin tone is always difficult for me, so if you have any tips on how to do that, let me know in the comments, but I'm just going to give this guy some Cadian flesh tone to start with. We'll come back to shade the face and fatigues later. So clearly the Cadian Shock Troops are kitted out with the same basic stuff as any other guard regiment. It's not the gear that makes the guard, then. As I mentioned earlier, they've got a spirit and discipline to them that makes them some of the finest soldiers in the Militarum. So much so that a great many non-Cadian regiments base their training and logistical structure off them. Not every Cadian makes the Shock Troops either. There are normal Cadian guards who don't make the cut and then go on to serve in rear or reservist roles or reinforce other guard regiments. That a washout of the Shock Troops is still a suitable candidate elsewhere in the Guard says something for the rigor of their training. Or the low standards of the Astra Militarum in general, but All that in mind, the Shock Troops face down Chaos Mutants, Xenos, and even Heretic Astartes with Valor and can actually come out on top. Now, of course, in this case, coming out on top usually means winning with a casualty rate that's well over 50%, but when your opponents are literal ancient aliens or crazed hellspawn that want to slice off your tender bits and feed them to you while they whisper sweet nothings in your ear, that's still pretty amazing. If you're wondering whether I'm saying it's the hellspawn cooing soothingly to you or your own tender bits doing so, the answer really depends on the enemy. Looking at you, Emperor's Children. Troopers won't always hold it together in the face of superior forces. A guardsman is still human. They're still vulnerable to corruption and the insanity of warp exposure. No matter how stalwart an individual is, being shown things beyond the comprehension of mere mortals is mentally taxing in the best scenario. Space Marine 2 does a good job of showing this off when the Thousand Suns full force shows up near the end of the game. You walk past quite a few soldiers who have lost themselves to insanity or been outright slaughtered in their shock. They whisper to themselves or bury their heads in their hands as they try to block out the overwhelming psychic assault of Senyian forces, and you can bet there's no way a commissar is letting them live after that, even if they do recover. In the best possible case, they're coming out of their fugue state and getting a bolt round right through the skull. Of course, a sizable contingent of Cadians in that part of the game do end up resisting the warp and go on to continue fighting. That's not really an abnormality for those raised on the actual planet of Cadia either. In fact, Cadian regiments tend to turn traitor at a lower rate than those raised from other worlds. I could only find 3 actual traitor Cadian regiments in my research, 2 of which were from the Dawn of War video game series, and one of which, the Cadian 666th, honestly just sounds like a meme number someone came up with to have a recognizable traitor guard for the story because hee demon number. Anyway, their continued loyalty can probably be attributed to sheer indoctrination to the Imperium, but there's an in-lore reason for them defying the powers of the warp more often as well. See, Cadia having a front row seat to the Eye of Terror meant that those guardsmen raised there could actually claim some measure of real resistance to chaos. The warp rift was visible in their skies at pretty much all times, and it was a common rite of passage for parents on Cadia to take their young children out at night and make them stare into the eye. And I get that the universe has been plunged into eternal war and all, and this is a world entirely devoted to war, but going to your kid and saying, "Okay, Johnny, you're 10 years old now, it's time to glare into the big glowy portal in the sky that hurts when you look at it," seems a little excessive. I guess it's hard to argue with the results, though. Anyone who couldn't handle it would go insane, and Inquisitors constantly patrolled the world looking to root out the numerous chaos cults that popped up on planet because of that proximity, so anyone who made it to adulthood tended to be unwaveringly loyal. Even with the same training and standards, the feeling of living one's entire life under an open Terran reality while being constantly threatened by secret police with bolt pistols can't be substituted or recreated. True enough, everyone in the Imperium lives in fear of a bolt round through the head for thinking a little too loudly that they really wish they didn't have to work an 18-hour shift, but trying to juggle that with the scary Renton spacetime whispering for you to kill your coworker every time you look up probably breeds a mentally hardy person. The destruction of the planet and most Cadian regiments needing to recruit from off-worlders in the era Indomitus denies newer recruits that small measure of resistance. Living under the Eye of Terror even caused the Acadians' irises to turn a light purple color, marking one more in a set of small differences that distinguishes the Cadians of the modern setting from their forebears. I'm going to attempt to recreate this on the mini, but first we need to get some prep done. I don't usually do the typical method of slather the whole mini in shade and instead prefer washing specific details to bring things out. I start with contrast paints, and know some people swear that using a base and a contrast is a sin, but I don't really care. I'm doing it anyway. A little Gilliman flesh on the exposed skin, some Militarum green on the flak armor, skeleton horde on the boots and leather, and it's time for our washes. We actually don't need to wash the things we just contrasted, so this is as simple as Seraphim Sepia on the fatigues, Nuln oil on the metal bits, and leave that to dry. And believe me, you want to give that at least an hour or 2 for the shade paint to settle in the recesses. I mentioned a minute or 2 ago that new recruits to the shock troops in the era Indomitus can't have had quite the same experience as a native Cadian did, and the old guard still around do a lot of moaning about how off-worlders could never be true Cadians. There's actually a weird undercurrent of prejudice in some of the novels where senior officers and even shock troops merely descended from Cadians sometimes look down on the transplants or those trained in the tradition. There's never any violence, no one deliberately lets their squad mate get killed just because they're from a different planet, but it looks like non-natives got passed up for promotions and important assignments with some degree of regularity around the turn of the millennium. And while it's true that the experience might be different, it doesn't seem to affect the new transplants' overall efficacy as soldiers. By the end of the first phase of the Indomitus Crusade, that is where we are right now in the setting narratively, the high casualty rate of the Imperial Guard and the dire need for more soldiers means that some Cadian regiments are almost entirely composed of these transplants, and many of them serve with distinction to prove that they're worthy of the shock troops' legacy. Hell, many of them genuinely think of themselves as Cadian and care deeply for the tradition and history that they've immersed and trained in. Still, the feeling of superiority remains among the Cadians. They revere their heroes, to the point where there's really, honestly, kind of weird and awkward moment in Shadow of the Eighth where Minka Lesk is given an audience with Ursarkar Creed. No, not the Ursarkar Creed, and that's kind of the awkward part. This is another Ursarkar Creed. He meets with Minka and essentially says she's a true Cadian, the kind that has to carry the legacy and teach the newcomers that they're not Cadian, no matter how hard they try. Yeah, the irony here is pretty palpable considering that this guy wasn't even at the fall. He's an accomplished general in his own right, having at least survived and served well until retirement, which is a thing that actually isn't even guaranteed in the Imperial Guard. But now he's centuries old and can't really fight effectively, so he's trotted out as a propaganda tool to inspire his fellow Cadians on the eve of a battle. The fact that he even shares a name and rank with the Lord Castellan, Ursarkar E. Creed, somehow inspires the soldiery, which is, frankly, pretty odd. From an out-of-universe perspective, it's the kind of satire that really shines a light on how ridiculous the setting of 40k is, and Justin D. Hill does a good job of conveying Minka's discomfort with that. But from an in-universe perspective, the idea of a 300-year-old general giving an inspiring speech carrying the name and rank of your people's hero must have some effect, I guess. For her part, Minka respects this creed and feels the weight of years, so to speak, but disagrees with his assessment of what a true Cadian is. In her own inner monologue, she brings up her staff and squad as examples and then goes on to deliberately promote several soldiers not raised on Cadia to command positions to show the capability and strength that the new Cadian Shock Troops could possess. That sort of balance between caring for tradition and saying, nah, screw this, I'm showing you prejudice is stupid, is why I really, really like this series of Cadia novels, because Cadia is gone. It's not coming back, it's done. What matters is what the survivors make of the legacy, and Hill does a pretty damn good job of exploring that. So, coming back to our painting, I took a dive straight into a concrete wall when I was doing my shades because I forgot to shake them up. That's how I got this crime against nature with the glossy finish. I'm gonna leave it aside and fix it up after the others, but for now, let's finish up another model. I'll lay down some thin demonette hide over the whole eye, then add 2 dots of unthinned pro-acryl bold titanium white gently at the edges to give the appearance of a purple iris. Oh gods above. Okay, that is really, really bad. I'm just gonna clean this back up and leave it there. I am clearly not quite there with my faces yet. Let's be honest here, no one else is going to notice that I did this, so it was mostly for me anyway. Looks like I'm snipping the heads off my guardsmen and printing closed helmets tonight. Last, I do my highlights. I don't highlight anything before washing, even though I should, and I'll probably change that soon once I get better, but for now we're doing this here. For the edge highlights, I just go with a slightly lighter color to contrast from my base coats and just go over details that I think need to pop or stand out from the rest of the model. My philosophy on it tends to be that less is more. Little edges of the armor and maybe a slight lightening of the leather to give it that slightly worn feel will do it. Just to finish up, I'll get a lump of Astro Granite on the base and spread it around, let that dry, and dry brush some Terminatus stone on the raised bits. Nice and easy because basing is probably my least favorite part of painting models. And with that, we're done. Not so bad, all things considered. 3 models, one with messed up shading and another with messed up highlights, but the last one with the full face visor is nice, and while I don't feel awesome about the highlights on any of them, I think it's good enough for the tabletop. Altogether, doing these in batches, I probably get at least a few done in the space of an hour or so, not including shade drying time. I try not to paint more than a few batches in a day so that I can enjoy the process and listen to some audiobooks while I do it, but I suspect that someone more experienced than I am could do this at a faster pace. I wanted to do more with this, but it's better for me to work on my army in smaller sprints than try to do it all at once. So, to finish up, some opinions on why I think the Cadians deserve your respect. They're not superheroes or superhumans. There's a common statistic that comes up in 40k circles to the effect that the average guardsman lives to see about 15 hours of combat before their untimely demise. And nothing I've seen suggests that Cadians have a better average. The statistic appears in a couple of core rulebooks, an Imperial Guard Codex, and there's even a novella about it appropriately named 15 Hours. I have scented candles on my desk that have a longer lifespan than that. I think that's what draws me to the Guard as a faction, though. These people are so resolute, so accepting of the reality of their galaxy and their place in it that they willingly march to war, knowing, and yes, most of them either know before deployment or find out very shortly after, that they've got fuck all's chance of surviving long term. Maybe this is just general IG wank, but this is the truth of how humanity survives. Not the Space Marines, they're too rare to fight every war. Not the Mechanicus. As much as I love their antics, they're all weirdos who don't care unless it involves them directly. It's the Guard that fights and wins time and again all across the galaxy to give the rest of the Imperium a chance at another day. The Cadians aren't the best, that's the Militarum Tempestus. They aren't the strongest, that's the Catachan Jungle Fighters. They're not even the ones who suck themselves off the hardest, that's the Volpone Blue Bloods. Ugh. You're a guardsman, buddy. Take off the cape and quit treating your assistants like their property. But the Cadians, they fight against the inevitable end across a million worlds and die in the dirt, often thankless and unremembered, without a lapse in discipline, or concentration, or resolve. Also, some poor bastard working a grueling job in a mine can wake up the next day and do it all again. And that is... I mean, it's something in this universe, right? So that's it. That's all I got. I'd originally planned on making one long video covering the Cadians where we did the shock troops, regimental organization, special units, and loadouts, and some lore featuring Hell's Last, the Cadian 101st Armored, my all-time top choice for guardsmen. But a couple things got in the way. I'm entirely new to this, and when I say entirely, I mean I've never done video editing on this scale, never tried to record the process of painting a mini, never put together a script for a video at all. When I realized that I was on about my 9th or 10th page of the original script, that trying to record and edit a massive video for my first ever project on this channel was going to burn me out and make the quality suffer, I made the decision to break it up. This video on its own is pushing 8 pages into 9, and I think even if that's a relatively short script, I'm doing myself and you a favor by keeping it shorter. It's more sustainable this way, and I think learning through the first couple videos how to use my software, not to mention things like lighting and angles for the painting footage, will be better in the long term. I want to keep doing this, and ironically, not breaking it up would probably make for a subpar experience and a waste of time for both of us, so bear with me. I'm expecting I'll probably make a supercut after the series is done for those of you who, like me, prefer really long-form videos. It'll also mean the quality of that supercut will likely be at least marginally higher than this first video, because I love working on projects and parts of them at a time, and then putting it all together and realizing I need to redo the editing on the first half because it's no longer up to my ridiculously unrealistic standards. So yeah, this'll probably be a 4-part series. This video about the shock troops, a new video on regimental organization and roles plus vehicles, another on specific and unique units, and the last one focused on Hell's Last specifically. After that, I don't know, maybe Votan or something? Either that or Black Templars or Space Wolves, maybe Death Guard? Let me know what you'd be interested in seeing, I'll try and keep it in mind. I probably have at least one kit from your preferred faction laying around here somewhere. Got a lot of unpainted minis I need to get through. Leave a like for the one true Chaos God, the YouTube algorithm, praise be its name. Subscribe if you want to be notified when the next part of the series is up, and let me know in the comments if there's anything specific you want me to cover next. Until I see you again, thanks for joining me, folks.